David, welcome to the floor plan.
Thank you. Wonderful to be here.
So you and I met last week. We were both speaking at the Work Tech conference in Sydney, and I believe that was your first trip to Oz. What did you think?
Terrible. Miserable country. No, I'm just kidding. It was marvelous. It, it's hard to say that it's what I thought it would be. I did not expect the extreme reverence for coffee. That's for sure. That took me totally by surprise, and it was wonderful. But also, I will say that almost every single person who took time to meet with me set aside like really focused time and sat down and really concentrated on the conversation instead of multitasking, doing like a million things, which unfortunately I feel like I'm sort of used to in America. So yeah, there were a couple times there where I'm like, I don't even get treated this nice by my friends back home. So it was really a warm place. I only was in Sydney. I didn't get a chance to go to any of the other cool spots in the country, but saw a lot, did a lot, met a lot of new people, and left with a lot of friends.
So no koalas, kangaroos in the Sydney CBD?
No crazy whatever Australian tropes, but really impressive. It seems like I was trying to get a sense of like how entrepreneurial the culture is. And I got sort of mixed reviews. Locals, like native born Australians, think of themselves as highly entrepreneurial, but then some of the out of town entrepreneurs tended to say, yeah, this is quite conservative culture, actually. So I don't know. I don't know what to think. It was a great first experience, though, and I look forward to coming back.
Yeah, I think they're right. The out of towners a bit. So we try to be entrepreneurial and we try to have a go at stuff, and we're definitely hardworking, but we've got the tall poppy syndrome. Did you hear about that?
No.
So, we're in a field, if one poppy grows too tall and you got to cut it down. So that's a really big thing in Australia, like not getting kind of above yourself. And so that natural self-confidence that I think Americans have, like you could walk down the street and say, what are you up to, dude? And like, oh, I'm starting the next Facebook, like amazing, go for it. And Australians would be like, yeah, sure. Good for you.
Yeah, maybe this has something to do with your irreverence for your politicians, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Like,
totally. Mm-hmm.
anyway, it's
Now,
great.
there's
Loved it.
really interesting leadership studies actually that show some cultural differences. So in a country like the US, you automatically give respect to a leader, a CEO, just because of the position. So Australia is one of the very few countries where we don't have any respect for positions of authority or leadership until that's actually earned. So when foreign CEOs come to Australian corporates, very often they fail because they assume that will automatically, the position will get respect and kind of those sort of things. And Australians are very much sitting back going, well, let's wait and see if you're worth my time. So, yeah.
Exciting. What a great way to start off an Australian podcast.
But you're not in that category, David. So we've already met you. So we already know you're a cool guy. So how did you get into workplace design, being an architect, classically trained?
I took a side door for sure. My background as an architect started in high performance buildings from like what people tend to think about as sustainability or green building or something like that. Very, very low energy, low resource, low carbon buildings. And but there's kind of like a weird echo. So I'm just going to double click on something about my background for a second. You do zero energy building. When you make that decision and set the performance target on the building, then a whole entire cascade of things go into effect. Like you have to immediately audit how much energy are we using right now. Then you go through the process of winnowing down as many energy saving methods as possible. So, and you approach it kind of the systems level. So you think about, okay, we had to switch over from incandescent lights, which are energy hogs, to LEDs, which are very efficient. We had to, increase the insulation in the windows and the walls. We had to tighten up the envelope. You had to do all these things, and at the end of it, you hit your target, and the bells go off, and everybody's happy. And then actually, that's not even true. You have to continuously optimize over time, and there are some really great case studies when you look at some of these high performance buildings where the management team on day one And these building managers are not guys pushing around mops. They're people sitting in front of mainframes, like managing zillions of sensors. Um, they can optimize a building over time to like reduce its energy load, like let's just say like 30% in a couple of years by getting to learn how to play the instrument.
Mm.
Okay, so then I'm jamming away doing work like that. And, 4 or 5 years ago, I started thinking about the potential of high performance buildings, not from like an energy and resource standpoint, but from a human behavior standpoint. And I got to that point in the workplace model simply by rejecting the workplaces that were presented to me basically my entire life. And I was participating in a kind of a cultural movement around this concept of deep work. And that has like there's kind of a practice that's involved in that where you get into high states of focus. And if you're sitting in an open office, it's almost impossible to do that, you
Mm.
know? So as part of this deep work culture, um, somebody who like otherwise was not like involved in the management of physical space at all, just somebody who is deep working to accelerate like their dissertation in like a PhD program, turned to me and like is like, hey, you're the architect. What would be the ultimate space for deep working, like the ultimate environment for deep working? And when I say deep work, I just mean doing cognitively demanding work in a distraction-free environment. And so I designed this thing called the Eudaimonia Machine. Um, and that's how I got in the workplace.
So I want to definitely hear about that and how you ended up in the shower on the front. Was it the front page of the Wall Street Journal or a big
It was
feature in the Wall Street
no, it's
Journal?
not front. It's not A1, but it was like they have this, they run a section every year called Future of Work, and it got a full spread in the Future of Work. But uh essentially like the Eudaimonia Machine was
And maybe for
uh
listeners, David, just who may not be familiar with this beautiful term that I love, eudaimonia, what
yeah,
that is, because a lot of
I mean,
people are not doing
right.
that. They're just
Yes.
surviving.
Okay. Perfect. So eudaimonia is a term that comes from the Greeks, like, arete or something like that. Like it's one of these great Greek terms that doesn't have like an immediate translation. Like if you try to translate into one word, the word that's most often used is happiness, which is poor translation for eudaimonia. But the best is a kind of a deep flourishing would be much better. And
Mm.
so, like the highest state of human flourishing in the entire text, the Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle, revolves around the term of like eudaimonia. And eudaimonia is an answer to this question of like, what's the best life? And is the best life about pleasure? No. Is the best life about honor? No. Is the best life about money? No. Is the best like so? What is the best life? And they the Greeks and like this idea predates Aristotle, but like he was the person who's we have the best literature that comes down to us on this topic. Um, he thought about it as the state of being the best version of oneself and engaged. And so even there's the example I think that's using the ethics is a knife. A knife, if it was expressing eudaimonia, would be sharp because that's the critical element of a knife, and then it would be cutting something. So if
Mm.
you have a sharp knife that's never used, that's not what you want. If you have a dull knife that you're using constantly, that's not what you want. If you have a rusty knife laying in a ditch, it's obviously not what you want. Sharp knife in your hand cutting something, that's when something hits its peak essence. So then the question of the ethics turns around is like, what does eudaimonia mean for you? When are you at your peak, totally engaged? And so other people have kind of touched on this exact or like this, I don't want to say this exact concept, but this roughly this concept.
Mm.
So sociologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi had a smash hit book in the late 90s called Flow,
Such a
and
good book.
flow state and being, and like, but even like jazz musicians talk about like being in the groove. And it's like a mental state where you're just, you sort of, time sort of distorts. Your energy pattern just locks in on whatever it is you're working on. And then you're just like, and so you could see how that doesn't necessarily mean you're happy. It just means you're like fully engaged. And
Mhm.
so like that's my critique of like the open office workplace has a lot to do with the idea that like if I'm sitting here working, or let's say we're having this podcast right now. Actually, I feel like pretty kind of in flow right now. That like, and somebody just comes up to me and taps me on the shoulder and says, "Hey, would you mind coming over here for a second, looking at this project?" Like that would just break the spell, you know? And
Hmm.
I think about this, and like in Unreasonable Hospitality, Will Guidara talks about this in a very interesting way too, where when you're creating a great experience for somebody, it's sort of like a bubble,
Mm.
and that there's, it's very difficult to construct in some ways, but it's kind of magical when it exists, and
Hmm.
then it's easy to break. And
Hmm.
so that's why like the concept like around the Eudaimonia machine is that it was literally like the word machine there applied is that it's a workplace where you would reliably get into a state of eudaimonia every single day you showed up to work. That was the promise. And the way
Mm.
to do that was to take you through like a series of experiences to get you closer, 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 and then insulate you more from the sort of distractions that would pierce the bubble, let's say. So I just want to say one other thing about that, which is that distractions get a bad rap in the workplace. They're kind of like the boogeyman of the workplace. I actually disagree with that. I think distractions are one of the great gifts of the workplace, but they just have to be put in the in their right place, in like a highly social setting where you can sit down away from your work when you're like recharging,
Hmm.
and um, and then if in that case, if you're like in a zone where it's like totally, within your permission to talk about whatever you want or do whatever you want, then that opens up entirely new possibilities to sort of discover new things about the people that are around you, forge deeper bonds with the people that are around you, surface and this is, I think, the most critical thing for like creating value for like a company is if you can build enough trust where you're willing to surface ideas or hunches that
Hmm.
you don't have totally resolved, but have been nagging you for a long time, and you've been nursing. Like that's what um, Stephen Johnson talks in Where Good Ideas Come From. Yeah, like oftentimes when like mega um, innovations happen, it's like two people who have been nursing a hunch secretly
Hmm.
meet, surface those hunches, they lock together, and they
Mm.
create something like some like flash of innovation that you know is great and all, but then you have to take days and weeks and months and years and decades sometimes to refine that flash of insight into something that's really positive or really
Mm.
valuable. So that's where
Absolutely.
you go back to deep work, you're in
Hmm.
the social
Zone.
spaces, exchanging ideas, get some good ideas, or maybe get some feedback and then get back to work.
So tell us about what it looks like. I mean, I know we've got this on YouTube, but for many people, they also listen uh, just on audio. So what does the Eudaimonia machine look like, and
Like a
what's with the
tour, you want
shower?
a tour?
Yeah, just
What's with
walk
the
us through
shower?
the, yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
Yeah, let's say you and I and the listener uh, enters the Eudaimonia machine. We come off the street. We go into a room that, let's say it's like uh, 7 meters by 7 meters, and it's like it's set up like a gallery. And there's like literally pictures on the walls, or like not pictures, but like pinned up um, uh, reports or images. Like I'm an architect, so like images are a big part, or sketches or drawings, or something from the field, or like a brief that's kind of coming, but like new ideas from around the company that represent work like the very edges of people's abilities, right? The fingertips.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
another way of thinking about this is like news,
Hmm.
like um, change that's like happening and innovation. And so big thing for me is that spaces send you messages all the time. They communicate values. They're not neutral, and so
Hmm.
this introductory space would be sending you a message that like, hey, this is a place that cares about ideas. This is a place that cares about creativity. This is a place that cares about innovation, and this is a place that cares about you. Like,
Mm.
what are you putting up on this wall that you're sharing with your peers so like everybody knows what's going on? So then you move from that space into what like the next zone, which would be a salon. And this would just be like one of your fabulous Sydney coffee shops Great coffee, maybe some books or magazines or something. It would kind of look like the space that I'm sitting in right now. It has some residential furniture around, and you're just comfortable.
Mm.
You're having a like an intimate conversation with a friend. That would be
Mhm.
like the feeling that you'd want to have. And building warm relationships. Then you move from that to the next space would be like a library space. So we have our coffee. We've been buzzed by like some interesting new ideas. We go to this library space, and there's two functions here. One is that um, it's purely a tactical separation between the workspaces that are to come and the social spaces that you just left.
Mm.
On a deeper level, I think that, you know, this is like about the cultural memory of the place that you're in. And if you look around and there's resources that are meaningful to the people that have been there and like have deep meaning, like lifelong
Mhm.
meaning, maybe
Mhm.
like very impactful books or maybe like, canonical projects or like recent standards that are really important to reference. Um, then the hard drive. This is like where you keep things you don't want to lose. And there's something like marvelous about the feeling of being amongst places like that, inheriting the culture that came down to you that was built up before you got there, and thinking about like what can I contribute that's going to be of enduring value, that's going to
Mhm.
last here after I'm gone.
Mhm.
That's a really powerful idea. Anyway, you go from there into an office. Okay. Again, this is like each one of these zones we're in is about 7 meters, 7 meters, let's say, and there are like 50 people that work here. You go in this
Mhm.
office, there's a handful of cubicles, two, three office or glass conference rooms, people talking on a phone call. And it's great. That's like 90% of the current office right there.
Mhm.
But we've
Mhm.
reduced that footprint down quite a bit. This is like where you kind of quote unquote collaborate, which just basically means meetings.
Mhm.
And uh and that's okay. That's good. We need that stuff, but that's not the end of it. So then you
Mm.
go further. You go through like another door, and you're in like this one is unique. You go through this door, and now you're like presented with an array of doors, say 5 doors. And each one of them has a little red light bulb outside of it. And if the red light bulb's on, somebody behind that door is in a state of eudaimonia. You're not yet, but like, let's say there's an open one and you go inside, you open the door, and you're in a smaller room, let's say 2 meters by 2 meters. And there's just like a shower and a locker and a little bench
Mhm.
and another door. And you could take a shower, lock the door behind you, take a shower, or just drop your bag, plug in your phone, reset. And, this isn't like because you're dirty or sweaty or anything like that, but you literally want to ritualistically cleanse yourself of every conversation that you had since you rolled out of bed in the morning because you're about to work on the hardest thing you know how to do for as long as you possibly can.
Mhm.
Once you're kind of set, you go open the last door and then you come into a small room again, just a couple meters by a couple meters, and there's a desk and a chair and maybe a skylight or a window. And you are totally insulated from the rest of the world. You sit down and you work as hard as you can on whatever it is that is really most important for you to be jamming on at that moment. And you work away. And then when you're done, after an hour or two, slip out and kind of work your way back through. Now, I had a client who actually suggested a further space, which I find very exciting, which would
Mhm.
be just pure contemplation. So you could exit deep
Mm.
work and go into like just a one empty zone per se that is just for sound reflection where your neurons are just firing. So if you think about it, like it was really funny. I was having a conversation with a lighting person while I was like working on the design of one of these one time. And I'm like, well, in this first zone, what you want is like gallery lighting, like in a museum. In the second
Mhm.
zone, what you want is like residential lighting, like in a house.
Mhm.
And then
Mhm.
third zone, you want task lighting, like in a library.
Mhm.
Last zone, you want like office lighting, whatever typical office lighting is. And then deep work zone, totally controllable by the person who's about to go in there. So you
Mhm.
just get all the rhythms and settings exactly just right, like right to how you want it.
Mhm.
And then in the last zone, it would be like ecclesiastical lighting, So it's almost like that is how I think this would work. How does that sound to you?
It sounds awesome. And what strikes me about it, I think we were talking in Sydney about Christopher Alexander's work and the pattern language, but the way you've described this is these transitions and liminal space, which we know plays such an important role in thinking and creativity. So was that a thought in this, that these liminal spaces as transition spaces of thinking?
I don't know. I don't really know to what degree Alexander really had any influence on this, but tell me a little bit more about what you mean by liminal.
So that transition in space where, anything could sort of happen, but it's like a zone between a space. So it could be a hallway. I mean, an airport is kind of like a liminal space. A
Okay,
doorway is a liminal
so
space.
so
Yeah.
there are no liminal spaces here. Yeah,
The
that's
door,
one
except for
way
the
of it.
doorways, maybe.
There's no hallways. There's only, I mean, I don't
Doorways.
think that doesn't mean there's not thresholds and there's not transitions.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are no hallways. There's no walking in the front door and then taking a long hallway down to deep work. Like, I don't think it works
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it'd be worth trying, but the, I think it's much more interesting to batch. Like, I don't think going into like a state of flow or state of eudaimonia or like whatever is like flipping a light switch on and off. I just don't
No.
think it works. Like, at least it
Mm-mm.
doesn't work like that way for me. I can't,
No. No.
buddy. But I think you sort of build yourself up to it. And that, again, it's like the spell is hard to construct and easy to break.
Mm.
Um, I think what's really going on here is that you're like the concept of the open office that comes, from the mid 20th century really takes all these different spaces that we're talking about here and putting them in a blender and just blending it on 10, until they're all together. Every one of those
Yes.
experiences you
Yes.
have together,
Mm-hmm.
if you want to encounter something new, if you want to talk to somebody about sport, if you want to read a book, if you want to do great work, if you want to do shallow work, like write an email, if you want to contemplate anything mystical, you're supposed to just do it at your desk or in a conference
Mm.
room, you
Mm.
know? And I think that that is not optimal for like how the human brain works. I think the human brain works and you probably know 1,000 times more about this than me, but like when you batch complementary behaviors together and you put logical barriers between those things so they can focus.
Exactly. Yeah. And that was going to be my next question about what are we getting wrong about workplaces. And so if we think about, there are cafe spaces and some of these new workplaces have lounge spaces or quiet contemplation zones, but it just doesn't ever really seem to work. So is it just because they're all too close together that
I don't know. Like, I don't think that well, first of all, I'm a stickler for circulation. So the idea of activity-based working where you still like, let's just say you take a big square plan and that you're allowed to move between any place
mm-hmm.
you want. In the circulation diagram, one person moving around looks like a pinball machine. I don't think that's a good sign. I think like a very clear line would be a good sign.
mm,
Um, I think that because I think that it is narrative in a way.
mm-hmm.
Or I think that like a really intelligent workplace could benefit from like a rich narrative applied to it.
Mm,
I think that the other element there is like, what is the target?
mm-hmm.
Like, actually, a university would be like my dream client for a project like
Mm,
this. You know
mm,
why? Because you could set the target. Like, what is
mm-hmm.
the purpose of this space?
Yep.
The purpose of this space is to produce
Deep
high
work.
quality, highly cited academic papers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Now let's figure out, like, let's just think about how to tune this thing. Okay. Who do you let in?
Mm,
Let's say top 100 scholars on campus.
mm-hmm.
Okay. Or
Mm-hmm.
50.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a club.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now I have like, and you get a key to this place. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
because it doesn't matter which college you're coming from, that's sort of irrelevant, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Um, so you get access to it. You come in, and what do you see on the like in the gallery space? Drafts of like papers that are going, or maybe like news of conferences that are upcoming, that like calls for papers or something
Mm-hmm.
like that. You see people that are posting that they need feedback on something or like looking to have a conversation with somebody. You see all or like upcoming seminars, like whatever, like,
Mhm,
ooh, all
mhm,
right, this is the raw materials, like the jolt of the verve of like academic culture. Then you go to the salon, what do you see? People. You just see
mm,
people and coffee,
mhm.
you know? Sit down. And if you don't know this person, have a conversation with them. Libby, why are you here?
Mhm,
What are you writing about? What are you
mhm,
studying? What are
mm,
your questions?
mhm,
You know? Great. And like, okay, great. It's nice to know about that, but like, where do you live? What's your favorite football team?
mhm,
Whatever, and
mhm,
like,
mhm.
then you move from that to this library. Like, imagine the rich materials that could be in a library like
No,
that, like the actual
amazing.
current reading, like of the, like, let's say that's where you keep like most, like each
Mhm,
scholar that's working there has a
mhm,
shelf. This is where they're keeping the current research materials on the thing that they're writing about,
mm,
or the book that
mhm,
they have in progress or whatever.
mhm,
Wow, sweet, awesome. Then you go into the office and there is like places where, yeah, like maybe it's just dead. You go in the office, it's just dead. Nobody's there.
No
You
one's
skip
there.
through, but then there's like all the Eudaimonia machines or like the deep workspaces are booked,
Mhm,
you
mhm,
know,
mhm.
and then probably there's some people recharging, because you can
Definitely.
only write 70 hours a day. And
Totally.
these people are probably clever enough to know that like there's a benefit to just like taking some time and space. But like what comes out of it? Let's say if an academic just on campus with the alternative setup is writing, I don't know, 2 papers a year. What if they could
Mhm,
get 4 papers a year out of this?
exactly. Mhm.
Or move their
The
book up a
needle.
year.
Yeah,
Do you see what I'm saying?
totally.
Like, I think that this would just be like a much, much, much accelerated way of doing things.
I think we need to try this as an experiment. And can we make the,
Yes.
the library look like the Bodleian? I mean, we don't want to copy Oxford, but that would be amazing, right? Everyone wants to work there with the high ceiling, and we know what that does for thinking and creativity. So, yeah, that would be amazing. Let's do that. I want
Who controls this decision at your university?
yeah, not me. But well, let's chat about that. I want to talk about creativity because you were chatting about a few interesting creativity spaces, which is an interest that we both have and many organizations, most now have, is how on earth do we get people to be creative and innovative? And unfortunately, most of the time, the approach is completely wrong. So I'd love to hear a couple of the stories you mentioned about these epic creative spaces that were quite maybe unintentional and also unconventional.
Awesome. Yeah, this is what I would write about if I was in the space we just talked about,
Mm-hmm.
is the architecture of hypercreativity. And when I say that, I'm separating out this class of projects that I've been collecting over the last 15 years or so that are places that were either essential to like a big breakthrough, either cultural or scientific or something, or they've just sustained like this enormous level of output, creative output for an extended period of time, stretching into decades.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of the case studies here that like are like very classic, like MIT Building 20 is a building you and I share a lot of admiration for.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you could look at Skunkworks, Pixar, Salk Institute,
Mm-hmm.
the Fun Palace by such a price, even though it didn't get built, I think it counts. And Bell Labs, Edison's original Menlo Park, and like, um, I even put like Kitty Hawk in there for like the Wright brothers for like a variety of reasons. But and then like, but there are lots of like, there are all these
Mm-hmm.
famous ones that are like
Mm-hmm.
really great. Um, but then there are places that are just amongst us. You don't
Mm-hmm.
even know. Like I was in New York recently in Brooklyn and I ran into so like I'm working on a book right now that's a like series of case studies on all of these and like trying to distill out patterns.
Mm-hmm.
Like what makes these places so great?
Mm-hmm.
Like I mean you want to see flourishing on like overdrive. This is
Mm-hmm.
it.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, these people are not necessarily all happy.
No.
They're exhausted, they're
Mm-hmm.
totally engaged. Maybe sometimes they're like feeling like the pressure and it's like really crushing them, but um they're definitely right in the center of whatever it is that they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Their industry is. And so anyway, but a lot of times they are pretty happy. And so no, I was in this a place called Volvox Labs, which you probably never heard of, but it's just like a creative agency that operates at the intersection of like industrial design, digital design, art installation. And I just walked into this place and I'm like, I see it all. I see all
Mm.
the patterns um, of like hyper creativity right here. And I'd never heard of this place. And it's like in a nondescript brick building, you know? And I'm like, they're there. They're all around us. So anyway,
Mhm.
um, why is creativity or like what was the initial question? Like what is it about creativity or why is like,
Yeah,
let's
I
just talk.
think just some of the patterns that you've seen. I think you talked about a band that they moved out of the recording studio and they went to a house.
Yes. So that's the project. Sammy Davis Jr.'s Pool House is the project that got me down, like that set me off on this whole journey. So this was in the late 60s. Um, a musical group called the Band. That was their name. They were the backup band for Bob Dylan when he transitioned from folk music to electric. They were playing with Bob Dylan in rural New York and Woodstock. It's actually a city, like a little tiny town, not just the site of the uh, big music concert. But
Mhm.
so they just like played music in their house, recorded these bootleg tapes. Those bootlegs became very popular around the country at the time when that was hard. And they got a record deal, and so they went to Los Angeles to record their breakout record. And they go to Capitol Records, and like they were confronted with this like glamorous studio, and the people coming out of the studio is like Frank Sinatra or somebody coming out of the studio, and like on the board, like coming in is like Aretha Franklin or something like that, and they just were like paralyzed. They're
Mm.
like full body no, like we cannot create the kind of music that we make in
Mhm.
such tight constraints.
Mhm.
So they left, and then like they called their manager and they asked if they could have an alternative setup. And he scrambled around and he found Sammy Davis Jr. was, I think, living in Las Vegas at the time. So they rented his pool house in Malibu and set up this little kind of clubhouse. Like Capitol Records sent over some like secondhand equipment or something. So they set up all the stuff. And
Mhm.
then they just replicated in this like little microcosm what they had going on in Woodstock. And they created this magical record, and they
Mhm.
really like I watched a documentary on the creation of this record, which is where I heard about all this. And it's actually like well documented, like photographically. And they just talked about it as kind of a clubhouse mentality. And they
Mhm.
would just work all day, like
Mhm.
in the zone,
Mhm.
getting like song after song after song. And it was like so great. And so I got just thinking, like, what would they have produced if
Mhm.
they would have been in Capitol? Would
Mhm.
it have been the same type of thing? I just
Mhm.
don't think so. Like, I don't
Mhm.
think it would have like come out the same on the other end, which would have been unfortunate. So anyway, but like if you look at um yeah, that process of creativity, I just think that there's different kind of energy that permeates. And like I just want to take a half step back and talk about why this is so critical now.
Mhm.
I mean, I think it's always been critical, but especially now, is that it seems like as AI is being trained to do more and more and more human tasks, it's hot. That is like that's a creative enterprise to even figure out how to get AI to do specific things for us that we actually want them to do.
Mhm.
And I'll put on an optimistic face and say that I think if we push AI in the right direction, it has the potential to give us an enormous amount of extra human agency, extra decision making, make our lives
Mhm.
better, and free us up to do the things that we want to do, not just that
Mhm.
we are burdened with.
Mhm.
Um, so like to uh to kind of throw a metaphor out there, like the Industrial Revolution created the tractor, which replaced a lot of muscle energy. It was either a
Mhm.
person or a animal pushing a plow through a field. It's not that we just wanted to stop farming crops. We just wanted to stop using so much muscle energy to farm crops, so we're rather use mechanical energy. So
Mhm.
now we're using artificial intelligence to do some of the heavy lifting. What can we do? So even in, like I'll just take myself as an example as an architect. I will like when you look at the different parts of a project and how like your fees are distributed, you get about 20% of your fee for the most creative part of the project.
Mm-hmm.
And then uh, you get 15% of your fee to like refine that. And then like a huge bulk of your fee to like do all the detailed construction drawings that actually is pretty tedious.
Mm-hmm.
Takes
Mm-hmm.
forever,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
So if AI was trained to do that
Mm-hmm.
and it allowed me to do more of the upfront pieces, and focus actually also more on the construction side of it and making sure like those details at the beginning are being applied correctly in the field. That'd be really great. You know, that's a very positive outcome. So it makes us more creative. Anyway, but like just like as a more practical level, these industries are just going to get upended,
Mm-hmm.
and we're gonna have to figure out like how to redesign a bunch of industries and
Mm-hmm.
like career paths going through those industries.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so there's a thousand reasons to like to make you there's a thousand reasons to be incentivized as a leader right now to make your organization more creative,
Mm-hmm.
or at the very least to identify what are the personas in our organization who are the most creative, and then create a bubble around them that allows
Mm-hmm.
them to create a ton of new value for you. You
Mm-hmm.
know, this is not a good time, I think, um, to kind of drag people backwards into the 9 to 5, 40-hour a week, Ford-based world. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and where they're sitting in an open office, dreading the fact that AI is going to come take their job. You know, that is not the best use of a very, very bright human brain right now.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I think a better alternative is to get people into modes where they're producing the maximum amount of value. And to that end, um, if you really want to go to town on this, Csikszentmihalyi, the Flow author, wrote
Mm-hmm.
another book on creativity, which I think is very good. For a business leader, it's about 10,000 times more useful than Rick Rubin's book on creativity. You know, for the average
Yes.
person, Rick Rubin's book
Yeah.
is very good.
Yeah.
But for a business leader, the Csikszentmihalyi book is exquisite. And
Yes, it is.
uh, and I would say that what he would like when it comes to creative environments, the key takeaway is that you could just think about 80/20.
Mm-hmm.
Highly creative people that have been very successful at creating breakthroughs in their fields, uh, and contributed enormous amounts of value to their field, have been documented spending about 20% of their time in what's called a hotspot, where you're amongst the other people that are at the top of their game doing the thing that you're doing. So if you're a physicist, you're at Caltech or MIT. If you're a musician, you're in Nashville, or if you're in acting, you're in Hollywood, and if you're on the stage, you're in New York or London. And like you want to be there. You want to be amongst the other top creators, and you also are kind of like in the presence of what Csikszentmihalyi calls the field, which are basically just gatekeepers,
Mm-hmm.
who are scanning for max value. But then, so you spend 20% of your energy like out amongst the whole community in those zones, which, in a 5-day work week would be 1 day a week.
Mm-hmm.
Most creative people in the world would spend the equivalent of 1 day a week in the like out in the population. They'd spend 4 days a week working heads down,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in an environment that they had tailored to be exactly how they like it.
Mm-hmm.
The right light, the right space, the right food, the right everything. And
Yep.
honestly, these people would make a lot of trade-offs so that they could maintain that autonomy for as long as possible, and then they're rewarded with whatever breakthrough they get, and then they get control over what they do and how they do it, and that's what we all want. The other thing I would say that like to the kind of business leaders in this community, and I don't know the answer to this yet, but I think it's super compelling, is that highly impactful creators, each one of us like I think has like that potential, and you're carrying around and like nursing some curiosity.
Mm,
It's just it could be each of us probably has a handful of these, just things that we're curious about.
mm-hmm,
And the thing about highly impactful, curious people when you meet them is that they're not people that necessarily are just like spouting ideas off like left and right. They're and they wouldn't even consider, they would probably chuckle if you said, "Oh, you're a really creative person."
mm-hmm,
They'd be like, "Well, I've had like two or three good ideas in my whole life."
mm,
You know,
mm-hmm,
the thing that separates you and me is that I just worked on those two or three ideas forever. Or I
mm-hmm,
picked one of those ideas and I worked on it for like 2 decades. You know,
mm-hmm,
maybe with AI we can accelerate like the impact that some of these have, you know. But I think that if you're a leader and if you could somehow create a permission structure where people felt comfortable or encouraged or rewarded for
mm,
hard, like for surfacing those curiosities, man, that could be gold, just gold,
mm-hmm.
you know?
Absolutely.
And then if you gave them a like a legitimate pathway, even if this was like, I mean, even if it was as low level as what like 3M and Google have historically done, where you give people like a day a week
Mm-hmm.
just
20% time.
focus on
Yep.
that,
Yep.
then I think like really marvelous. Yeah, like it's going to be, my guess is that it's going to be extremely effective and not very efficient,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know? But
Mm-hmm.
in business, only one of those two things really matters.
Wins. Yeah. I love, 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 love all of that. But if I'm an average person, just to finish up, David, and unfortunately my leader, not me personally, this is the hypothetical employee whose leader is not anywhere near being on this page, who's working in an open plan office, who doesn't have any of these kind of wonderful things to get into this eudaimonic state and into flow, what advice would you give them? What are some small steps they can take to sort of harness this back and get towards these amazing states that we're talking about?
Um, so I think that if you, the Cal Newport is the guy that you want to talk to or look up if you want the like he's created a mountain range of advice on along these lines. To crib note that, I would say that you have to cultivate rare and valuable skills. Uh, I think a lot of people fall into these traps where they become like sort of hamstrung and feel that they're not in control of what they do or how they do it because they've got skills that are either rare and not valuable. Like, let's say they're able to construct medieval weapons, you know, or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Okay,
really cool,
neat,
but not very
you know,
valuable today.
not
Mm-hmm.
very valuable. Or like, let's say they have skills that are extremely valuable but very common. You know, let's say in my field, you know, you're very efficient with like drafting software.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's super valuable, but so are 80 million other people. So
Mm-hmm.
get in your cubicle, you know.
Mm-hmm.
The so if you can figure out like there are seams of uh and it's always, you know, it's we live in dynamic professional landscapes. If you can figure out where there's high value, but not a lot of people are providing value in that way,
Mm-hmm.
and you're able to learn quickly and maybe devote like a lot of energy to figuring out how to develop rare and valuable skills, then you can there's a two-step process. You become um, extremely dependable, and then you become indispensable. At that point, you gain much more leverage over um, you know, the kinds of choices that you can make, but you can't just want it
Mm-hmm.
without providing any evidence that you deserve it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Unless you're willing to just go off on your own and just take a wild chance, but your likelihood of failure is extremely high. What I
Mm-hmm.
was describing a second ago, if you take that pathway, your likelihood of success is extremely high.
Yeah, I love that. So I think I could absolutely talk to you all day, David, but we won't, unfortunately, don't have time to do that right now. But I think what we need to do is build the Eudaimonia machine, and then we need to hang out in the salon or the library and record and the next version of you on this podcast after your book comes out.
Okay, well, like just before this stops, like what resonates? what lands most strongly with you or aligns most, you know, I don't want to say perfectly, but aligns, like there's strong alignment with what you've been seeing, studying, researching, publishing
Yeah.
on for a long time?
I mean, honestly, everything, the bubble idea, because the psychological reaction we have to space is really what happens when we walk into a workplace. We don't just react to, oh, there's a plant and that's giving me better air quality or making my blood pressure lower. So, I feel less stressed, or, there's a really pretty piece of furniture. So that's nice. As a human being, we react psychologically and then psychophysiologically to the entire space when we walk in. And that can be a range of reactions, as you appreciate. And so we have to be really, really much more cognizant about what is it that we are constructing, because space is literally a cognitive scaffold. As you said, when you walk into that first space, what are we wanting to convey in this space? So one of the things about Building 20 was that the patina gives the permission, right? So here's a kind of beat up, iterative space. You can move the walls, you can paint stuff on the floor. That gives me permission to say, well, I can try stuff here, I can experiment, I can take risks, I can do something that's out of the box. Unfortunately, most modern workspaces are kind of curated down to the last detail. We've got some orange flowers on reception, and that matches with our orange bench top in the kitchen. And the message is, you can't do anything here, you can't change anything. It's this perfectly created thing that's finished, right? And so there's no ability for us to bring ourselves into that space, or to adjust it, which we know personalization is such a huge thing in engagement, in job satisfaction, in performance. Is how much can I identify and bring my identity into this space and personalize this space. So I think I've been a fan of Flo and Mihaly forever, even though I could never pronounce his name. It's Stephen Johnson and all of these books, because it's really
Well, there's
talking
another
about
one
the
that's
intentional
related
act.
to what you just said. Have you ever read Prime to Perform by Neil Doshi?
No, I haven't actually. I've
Okay,
heard
and
of it.
Lindsay McGregor.
Mm-hmm.
So these are two ex-McKinsey people who uh, went off and started their own consultancy, and they studied the science of motivation, and they found that, like, they identified 6 things that can motivate you. 3 of them are positive, 3 of
Mm-hmm.
them are negative. They
Yep.
all work.
They all work.
Okay.
And that's
Yeah.
actually
So,
a really important point, because when you
so
talked about negative mood and creativity, there is a positive correlation between negative mood and creativity, because creativity is not all just sunshine and rainbows. It's struggle, and it's breaking through those problems, right?
exactly right. So let me just finish the thought here, because it comes around. And I've had a conversation with Neil about this, all the topics that we're talking about right now, and he said something that was like very, very clever, and not at all surprising. So the 3 positive things that motivate performance are: play is number
Mm-hmm.
1. If
Mm-hmm.
you feel like what you're doing is play, nobody needs to ask you to keep going. You'll just
Hmm.
keep going and going and going.
Mm-hmm.
2 is potential.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I'm studying really hard for this exam because I know I'm going to get into this elite university or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm working hard now in the hope that I get rewarded down the line. That's great. And then the third one is play potential. And it's another P. Damn it. Um, purpose.
Purpose. Yeah.
If it aligns with your greater purpose.
Mm-hmm.
On the other side, like, so yeah, you will work if you feel like there's purpose behind what I'm doing. The
Mm-hmm.
other side, the things that will motivate you but are negative, emotionally negative, and drain you, are financial pressure,
Mm-hmm.
emotional pressure,
Mm-hmm.
and inertia.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Not be, yeah,
Uh,
which is what stops most people in organizations
Right.
nowadays.
But now, if you think about going into that space that you described, that really like clean, elite, high dollar per square foot space, looks like a museum.
It does,
And
exactly.
this is what Neil said. He's like, you can't play in a museum.
You cannot.
And so, like, that's the idea. But if you go into building 20 at MIT and it looks all janky and like
Mm-hmm.
kind of nasty,
Yeah,
this
cool.
looks like a playground for
Exactly.
the smartest nerds in the world, you
Exactly.
know? And that's
Exactly.
exactly who's showing up to play
Yeah.
day after day after day, which is why that building produced more patents, than any other buildings on MIT's campus,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it was so engaging. And that's what you're really targeting for, is like high engagement. So if you're listening, just put the performance target on your workplace of high engagement, and then work backwards on the cascade of things that will get you there. And let's go. Like, this is all possible. We finally know how to do this. So let's do it.
Let's do it. Love it. Thank you so much for your time today, David, and look forward to talking again very soon.